Welcome to the Church Leadership Podcast, your weekly source for encouraging and equipping local church leaders, with your hosts, Mark Gainey and Andy Frazier. In each episode, Andy and Mark sit down with church leaders that you should know. We believe these honest conversations will be helpful and encouraging to you as you lead the local church. Here is this week's episode.
So glad that you have joined us for today's episode, and it is going to be an awesome one. I know you'll be encouraged and equipped as you listen. Before we get to that conversation, though, I want to remind you of a couple things. If you're new to our podcast, welcome aboard. And if you like what you see or what you hear today, then certainly go back and listen to the rest of the episodes. We've got a huge archive now as we've been doing this for almost 2 years. And so go back and listen. Also subscribe. We don't want you to miss a single episode. You can subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast listening app. And we also ask that you rate our podcast. Believe it or not, that really does help us get the word out about it. The way, Apple and Stitcher and YouTube and all those things are, when you rate our podcast, for whatever reason, it helps the algorithm and more people see it. So you can do that really easily at ratethispodcast.com/CLP. All right. So now we're excited to bring you this conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on the podcast. We are delighted that you are listening, and thank you for our longtime listeners and for those who are joining us for the first time today. This week we have Matt with us. Matt Burford serves as the Apologetics Specialist with the Alabama Baptist State Board of Missions. He also has a couple of other things he's involved in. He's involved as the founding member, I guess you could call that, Matt, of Tactical Faith. It's an apologetics nonprofit. And he also serves as an adjunct professor at Birmingham Theological Seminary. So, Matt, we are so glad you are a busy guy that you took time out to join us this week on the podcast.
Well, thanks for reaching out. This has been something I've been looking forward to doing.
Absolutely, man. We had plans to get you on earlier, but it didn't work out. But I think maybe God's sovereign in that too. And we're still in the middle of COVID as we record this, and we may get around to that part of the conversation too. But I want to start by asking about just apologetics, period. I mean, you have a passion for apologetics. You helped start a nonprofit group aimed at apologetics. That's what your role is with the State Board of Missions is basically apologetics evangelism, or in that regard. So tell us a little bit about your story in the sense of how did you become interested in apologetics and what impact has it had on you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say it all started in 1994 when I was a junior in high school. And I tell people that I was looking for a book to read while we were taking up pre-SATs. I don't know if y'all remember taking those big cumulative exams.
Oh, yes.
And the teachers would always say, pick a book for you to read in between our subjects that we're going to take. I remember going to my dad's shelf and pulling down two books, God in the Dock by C.S. Lewis and Other Essays, and another one by C.S. Lewis, which was Problem of Pain. I don't know why I picked those two. I just did. And I still remember the time that I was sitting there upstairs in Saxe, Alabama, in Saxe High School, opening up that God in the Dock, reading the first essay. And I'm telling you, I was blown away. I've been a Southern Baptist all my life, at that point in time up until I'm 18 years old. And I'm a good Christian kid. I do all the good Christian things. I think that I kept myself pretty much clean. I'm doing the right things. But something happened that day when I was reading somebody that was talking and thinking like that. I don't know what it was, but it just started me on a journey that went through college. And of course, I'm taking the usual track that most people do that like apologetics. I start picking up Ravi Zacharias, G.K. Chesterton, George MacDonald. I mean, I'm picking up all the right people. And then I just happened to pick up a book that sent me to a guy named Greg Kokel in California, who has a website called standtoreason.com. And me and him became friends. And 10 years later, I started a nonprofit. And 10 years later, here I am today doing all those fun things you said that I'm doing.
Wow.
Yeah, you're a busy guy, and we're thankful for how God has used you, not only in our state, but in the local church and helping. I mean, our goal here on the podcast is to encourage and equip leaders in the local church, and apologetics is a very, very crucial part of that, especially in our society today. So tell us a little bit about the last 10 years of being involved in a nonprofit organization that helps the local church and helps equip people to understand and defend and their faith and even share the gospel in our culture and society we live in today.
So my wife left medical training. She was at University of Alabama, Birmingham Medical School. Then we had residency, we had fellowship. We moved to Montgomery, Alabama in 2009, and I started church at First Baptist Montgomery with Jay Wolf. Jay Wolf allowed me to kind of shadow him because I didn't really have ministry experience. Had a master's of divinity at Beeson Divinity School, but never really had pastor experience. I helped my wife through medical training by being a computer guy. So I was looking for church work. Jay brought me on. It's because of him that I started what I did, because he allowed me an opportunity to carve kind of space and a place at First Baptist Montgomery to teach apologetics. And I learned right off the bat that I had a lot to learn about teaching, but I enjoyed watching other people have the same experience that I did back when I told you when I was in high school, that our faith is something that's deep and incredibly wide, and in terms of our worldview, it's consistent in the way it talks across what I call the 5 major questions, which is origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And then there's a 5th one too about authority. But their lights would turn on in the sense of saying my faith is now, it's not that it wasn't real beforehand, but now it's something that I can talk about in a way that reflects the faith that I have. And I think that's what happened to me that day. Was just I was warranted in my faith. I mean, I know for a fact that God owned me and that Jesus was my Lord. But now I was introduced to an entire kind of history of a conversation of church intelligence past, of folks that were able to say it in a way that comes incredibly close to how I feel about it. And of course, you can't exhaust that. I mean, it's not, I'm never going to say that I can put on paper what my faith is. But the reality is there's even right now, presently, there are so many resources and people in the apologetic world that are out there with a passionate desire to speak about their faith clearly, reasonably, emotionally, spiritually, one that reflects the faith that we have. And I think that's what my goal and mandate for something even like my nonprofit is, which is to go out and help the church understand there is a way to talk about our faith that's incredibly persuasive, a way to reflect our faith that's incredibly impactful. And apologetics is just part of that. It's an entry point into a world where we understand that we can use our mind, we can use our spirit, we can use our hands in service to reflect the faith and love that we have for our Lord and the bigger magnanimous love that he has for us.
That is awesome. Well said. So we've never talked about this, but I share a passion in apologetics. I actually taught an apologetics and worldview course to a Christian high school several years ago, and I've loved it. And here's what I've noticed, and that was several years ago, that there is a distinct lack of apologetic teaching, training, equipping in churches. And I've found that people are afraid to share their faith, or afraid to get in those conversations where they're defending their faith or even explaining their faith, because they feel like they're not ready. And so I guess talk to us a little bit about how you've seen trend wise, is apologetics, is it getting better or worse in the church in the 21st century? And why do you think it's so important for churches, leaders listening, and volunteer or pastors listening to dedicate or devote some time and energy and resources to that very thing?
Yeah, another great question. 20 years ago when I started all this, nobody even knew what the term was. I'm talking on a popular level. Even a religious state like we have, apologetics was, I still get the question, but 20 years ago, I would get, what are you apologizing for? And so I'd have to back up and I'd have to define apologetics. And I get it. It's just part of what I do. 20 years later, there's hope. Because of the resources that have been produced, because of the people that are out there. I had the pleasure to be a part of Briarwood Presbyterian put on a big, huge Rethink conference a couple of years ago. There were thousands of people there, and there were young people and their parents and adults. And when you're walking around, you could feel like something was different. There is a movement afoot for people to want to know how to share their faith, to want to know that their faith is warranted, to know that our faith is grounded in truth and reason. Those are incredibly important. So, yeah, I would say maybe 15 years ago, I thought, oh, I have an uphill battle here. I started my nonprofit in order to help get this kind of training into the local church in the state of Alabama. I would say if we're doing a State of the Union and somebody asked me to do the State of the Union of apologetics in the church in our state and probably out, I would say we're in a good standing. We're at a good place. And in fact, we are positioned incredibly well for the struggles and pressures that we have in the future, because we have a lot of people that are trained. So to those pastors that are wanting to, what is apologetics? How can I use it? How can I integrate it into my church? I would say, hey, there are more resources out there now for you and for your church than ever before. There are more speakers now, even locally, even in the South, that are willing to come to your church and help you through it. You have help. Pastors have so much going on. I'm sure, I'm going to lunch today with one. I know there's an incredible amount of pressure on them. But all parachurches are there to help the church. They're not there to replace the church. And running a parachurch, I've seen that. And I just want to let pastors know there's things out there for them. There's resources out there to support them. Use them. They don't have to be all things to all people that way. That's the reason Paul used the body language. There's so many people willing and waiting to be a part of ministry in a local church. Just, bloom where you're planted, as Greg Coco would say, and be willing to be open and show some humility and bring some folks in that can help you train.
That's a great point. You don't have to have all the answers, pastor and leader. There's people out there who can do it for you. It's a great point.
Yeah, that's encouraging to know that someone like you or an organization like Tactical Faith, or how you serve with our Alabama Baptist State Board of Missions, how someone like you can come alongside a church leader and help them and identify some areas where they can really put some time and effort into discipling their people. And the world we live in, you said, in our culture that we're doing okay, but I mean, we're always in need of growth and more knowledge on how we can adapt and how we can relate to people in our culture. I mean, right now you've got people who, on one hand, they're saying, truth is irrelevant. And then on the other hand, they're saying, if you got to be equipped on how we can handle that as followers of Jesus Christ, how we can, with grace and truth, go about sharing the gospel. So as people are listening today, what would you say maybe would be some very important things for us to understand and kind of take to heart so that we can do a better job of sharing the gospel in the current climate, the culture we live in today?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this yesterday as I was talking to somebody who called me about this particular thing. The perception out there is kind of a negative one, that we're moving into a very strange time. Maybe negative meaning we just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and it's probably always been that way to some degree. But what I would say to that is be encouraged that again, that our worldview speaks consistently and comprehensively. And you take that encouragement and listen, you don't have to know everything. It's okay to enter into a relationship with an unbeliever not knowing everything. And in fact, curiosity can be quite compelling. To be interested in your faith in a way that you're open and honest, even to an unbeliever, and say, listen, I don't know that, but I would be willing to get into a conversation with you about that. I think is something that all church leaders should be willing to do. And to tell their people, listen, it's okay to say you don't know it all. In fact, I would think that's a good starting point. Well, what we would call in the philosophical word epistemic humility is, I think, incredibly compelling. And when we think of millennials and Generation Z, the Gen Zs, they're looking for something that they can I guess, ground themselves in, and they're looking for something that is incredibly genuine. I mean, they're looking for real things. And I think the starting point of epistemic humility, or just saying, I don't know, but I would like to be in a relationship with you to a point where we can know this together, I think shows off the bat, right off the bat, and for somebody that you're open and honest, and you're curious, and you're smart enough and confident enough in your own worldview to be able to enter into that type of relationship. I think that first and foremost has to be the starting point. When I did my dissertation, and I don't mean to throw it out there like that, but I had gone through 8 years of apologetic ministry, and I got real depressed because of things that I saw, which were leaders and others not starting with a point from the first point of humility. So when I would go around and ask people, hey, what's the starting point of apologetics, and what's the starting point of all Christian education? Most would just scratch their head, and I would say, oh, we got that in the Bible. It says the fear of the Lord. And in fact, all of wisdom literature starts with that premise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. And that's all of us, all humans. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of all knowledge and understanding. And you have to start that way. Does that make sense? I don't know if that answered your question, but I think that's what we have to understand as Christians moving forward, is that we have a positive gospel message of hope that can answer questions legitimately and comprehensively and consistently. But we need to start with humility, and we need to start with love. And that sounds hokey, but it's true. You cannot see the world rightly for how it is without having worship and serving into the community. And my dissertation actually looked at what would apologetics look like without worship? What would apologetics look like without service in the community? And what I would say is, without those things, we can't understand the world because we're not being Christ-like. So, and we don't think those terms, especially in the Baptist world, because we have the pulpit in the center in our worship, right? So in other words, we hear the word, we think about the word, we might chew on the word, but without worship and without service into the community, we can't have humility to help us understand the word to a point where we can take it out into the world.
What an incredible point. And that, in 2020 and 21, probably 22, that is such a needed reminder. With all the pride and talking points in all different directions, humility is the starting point. Fear of the Lord. That is fantastic. That's encouraging and convicting. So as we close out our time, it's hard to believe that we're getting to that point, but as we close out our time, here's what I want to ask you. I think it's good for us, especially church leaders, to have some handles, right? And to be able to say, okay, this is where I can start. So for someone if a church leader who's a volunteer, or a pastor who's solo pastor or whatever, and they want to help their people understand apologetics, be equipped to have those, faith conversations with people who may not believe and may have doubts and questions. What are some, I guess, go-to resources or tools that you would suggest that they start with to get a good handle on apologetics?
Do you have an hour? That would be an hour show.
Oh, and hey, just to let you know, Matt, in our show notes, we will be posting a link to Tactical Faith, and even if you want, we can throw your email in there so that they can get in touch with you. Because I mean, the question mark ask and your answer, do you have an hour? I mean, I know there's a ton of stuff, but give us the short list. So.
Oh yeah, I think that's great. And again, a little plug. I mean, you can put that's what I'm paid to do. I mean, the Alabama Baptists pay me to be a resource. So I'll give you my email. I love taking emails from people. I love conversations with email. The last 8 years, I've started a nonprofit so I can go out to lunch with pastors. That's basically what I've done. When you look, I mean, we've done events and all this other stuff, but I love talking with people about apologetics. But to give you a handle, this might sound a little strange, but the first place I would go is YouTube. YouTube is a vast library of all the greats out there. From just think about Lee Strobel. I mean, just take him in his Case for Christ series. I mean, that's a really good one. You have Timothy Keller has his Reasons for God. I'm just pulling them. I mean, even the old guards like Josh McDowell and his son Sean. I mean, they're a great resource, and these guys they have a heart for ministry, and their stuff is not very difficult. And what I mean that, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. What I mean that it's made and created for a vast majority of people to understand. So Lee Strobel's Case for Christ stuff that he does, I think, is really good for church leaders. It's accessible. That's a good word. It's accessible. Uh, it's made for a wide audience, and it's a real starting point to go, into the apologetic world. And listen, guys, this goes deep. The whole apologetic enterprise, and can go pretty deep. So we can go as far as you want to go with it. But just for the starting point, Case for Christ, YouTube, you have to be careful with YouTube, of course. We just put on your, filter and just go after it. But there's all kinds of people on YouTube that have done a really good job. Stand to Reason is another good one. I have friends even close, for those who are listening in Alabama. We have people like my buddy Jay Watts, who has Merely Human Ministries, and all he does is talk about issues in regards to life issues, abortion, pro-life issues. So there's names of people that you can Google, but if you're going to put my name in a show notes, man, I would stay up all night long for people to email me, because this is just the world that God is put on my heart. It's a world that I'm passionate about. I am an apologetic nerd.
And Tactical Faith has a lot of resources too, obviously.
Yeah, Tactical Faith is we've been around for 10 years. We have some great videos. We actually have we've partnered with some of the greatest minds in the Christian evangelical world and in, the broad Christian world. I mean, we brought Professor Eleanor Stump, who's a Catholic, to talk about suffering. So we're merely we're a mere Christianity outfit, and I made it to be that way. My buddy Gary Habermas says it's kind of sticking with the basics, and in that way, I think we can partner with a lot of people in the Christian world. So yeah, go to tacticalfaith.com. I have a fun little podcast that I do. It's probably it's just something that I do for fun. That you can check out. I also have some PhD scholar guys that do one on philosophy. If you want to do a dig deep on philosophy, disclaimer: one of them's Anglican, so you're going to go. You're going to go pretty deep into that world with his side, but he does a great job too. So yeah, Tactical Faith's a resource. Alabama Baptist State Board of Missions is a resource. You can get me there as well. I hate to plug myself. I like to plug others, but hey, I'm just willing and ready to help anybody who's out there.
Matt, that's the reason we had you on the podcast today. You are a resource. So there's no need to apologize for being apologetic.
There you go.
Yeah. But no, man, we're so glad that you're able to join us today. This has probably not only been helpful to a lot of people who have listened today, but it's probably intriguing. There's probably people who are thinking to themselves, I need to know more. I need to dig a little deeper. I need to figure out how I can prepare myself. And I'm telling you right now, having been in ministry a long time and a lot of that time in student ministry, one of the greatest things that student ministries can do is invest some time and intentional efforts in apologetics, teaching their students how to understand their faith clearly and how to defend it graciously, but also it translates into how they can share the gospel well. And so thank you so much for being that resource and letting God use you. And we appreciate what you shared today. We know those who have listened today have been encouraged and equipped to lead in the local church and to better defend their faith.
Well, I was honored to be asked on. So thank you, guys.
Absolutely. We'll see y'all next time.